Hi, everyone. Virtual. Nice to see you. Chris, you're going to have to get used to talking to the owl too. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to come over here. Still learning how all of this is going to work in the hybrid land, but I appreciate you all being here in person and those who are joining us here virtually. I just have a few announcements that I wanted to go through quickly, if I can get this to work, before we introduce our speaker. Who in the room and or at home has seen Chris speak before? Yes. Yes. So if you don't know, if you've never seen Chris speak before, he has been one of our best speakers ever of all time. I think one of his last presentations, which was quite a few years ago, got rave reviews. So I'm really excited for you all to see him and be here with us today. I do want to give a shout out to our amazing partners. We do have a few of them here in terms of tables, and Mulberry Talent, Lauren Francis is back there grabbing some food. So feel free to talk to her as well. We have HR Answers here with a booth in the back. And I believe she has some freebies and such. Yes? Yeah, of course she does. Of course she does. So feel free to help yourself and go say hello to them. We also have Zenium here, and they have a raffle that you scan a QR code. So make sure that you head back there and say hello to Zenium. We also have MaxList, Boley Welch, and OcuScreen as additional partners. And I'm sure if any of you have ever been to a PERMA event, you know that without our partners, PERMA would not be a successful chapter. Not only do they help support PERMA, but they also give you resources and tools and services that you need in order to make your life much easier as HR professionals. So please make sure to say hello to them. I want to just quickly talk about some housekeeping. So again, help yourself to food and beverages. You are all entitled to 2 beverages today. And then of course, there's tons of food in the back, which I hopefully will be helping myself to some, whatever, you guys know what I'm saying. Soon anyways. And then the recertification credit for today will also be emailed to you all tomorrow. So make sure that you checked in with Marcette. Feel free to ask questions. So those of you who are at home or in your offices joining us virtually, you can unmute yourselves and we can hear you in the room, which is awesome and also creepy. We can't see you though. I originally said that we could see you, but we can't see you. So you guys can come off camera if you want. But you can also use the chat. I will also be monitoring the chat and will help facilitate some of that. There is going to be a breakout. So Chris will be breaking you out into rooms and he's going to let me know how many people in the room. So those of you at home will also be joining us for that. Please share your business cards. There's a way to pull up your QR code in LinkedIn. I forget how to do it. I was trying to remember myself how to do it so I could show you. But you can always share your QR code in LinkedIn as well with each other instead of handing out physical business cards. We do have a couple of upcoming events that I want to highlight. We have our compensation and benefits day that's coming up next week on July 28th. Then we have our mentorship kickoff event. So mentees and mentors have a mandatory session for that comes up on August 25th. And you guys are probably asking yourself, why are there not events between July 28th and August 25th? And that's because we have a very large event that I'm sure some of you have seen. It's our annual strategic management conference, and you are getting a first glimpse at our theme and our logo for this year. So our theme this year is humanity, resilience, this is HR. So really talking about you as HR professionals, what you do for yourself, your team, and really hopefully inspiring you to continue to focus on yourself, because we can't be there for everybody if you're not there for yourself, right? So this event is going to be held on September 14th. It is going to be a hybrid event at the Oregon Convention Center, and we'll also be using the VFairs app as well. So make sure to watch your email for those announcements coming hopefully next week, maybe even the first week of August. And with that, I am going to stop the screen share and hand it over to Marcette, who is going to introduce Chris.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Thank you all for being here. We're so excited to be in person. I love seeing everyone's beautiful faces. Our speaker today is Chris Sheasley. Chris fixes interpersonal conflict in workplaces. Having made conflict resolution his only profession, as well as his passion, over 30 years, Chris is among the most experienced and well-known conflict management consultants on the West Coast. He's helped people overcome discord in many organizations you've heard of, such as Providence Health Systems, Norm Thompson, Pacific Source Health Plans, Georgia Pacific, Oregon Health and Sciences University, Northwest Natural, and countless other companies and government agencies. He's also served on 15 professional mediation rosters. Among his special projects are constructive conflict, training for Intel, Metro Regional Government, Xenium HR, Portland General Electric, Fairbanks North Star Borough, the Port of Portland, and others. Also, facilitation of regulatory streamlining process for Oregon's Workers' Compensation Division, and exclusive strategic alliances with HR Answers and Xenium HR. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce Chris Sheasley, the conflict resolver.
Okay. Imagine that, a technical problem on Zoom. The kindest thing anybody said to me in the last 2 years was when I was having trouble with an online Zoom presentation, and they said, don't worry, Chris, we've all been there.
Well, we have them all up and running. There we go.
We're in.
There we go. Okay. No, let this get started finally.
Can I see my, Nikki, can I see my slides? I need to be able to see your phone. Okay. I'll try it again. I'll just do it. Okay. You didn't see that. You didn't see that. All right. Okay, folks. Hello and good afternoon. Happy to be here with you all. I want to tell you a little tale of woe to begin our time together here. I'm going to tell you the story of Ben and Cheryl. So Ben was the director of an organization, and he was really fed up with Cheryl. He was feeling like she was demolishing personal relationships all across the organization in pursuing her department's needs exclusively and forgetting about what everybody else needs in the organization. And pretty much he felt she was been a wrecking ball and just gone around the organization without regard to interpersonal relationships, just trying to get what the finance department needed. She was the CFO. And the most recent incident was when she had one of her staff go to one of the common areas and commandeer an important piece of office equipment. Took that piece of equipment back to the finance department, leaving other people totally like gasping in frustration. Like, how can they do that? They can't take that equipment. That's for the whole organization, not just for the finance department. So he said things like, I'd fire her today if I could talk the CEO into firing her. But of course, she's like a 23-year incumbent employee, highly placed, highly skilled, and very technical in her role. So not somebody easy to get rid of. Now, for her part, Cheryl was very frustrated with Ben, felt like he was not interacting, he was ignoring her, marginalizing her, not letting her kind of fully integrate into the executive team, and that he was kind of her nemesis on the job. So that was kind of the setup, and all of this led to the great conflagration. The great conflagration took place one day when Ben held a special executive team meeting, unannounced, no agenda. Everybody shows up from the executive team, and sitting there around the table, it turns out that the topic is the use of important office equipment in the organization. Which of course completely kind of outs Cheryl in the team session here, where he is explaining about how we need to protect office equipment and not let people take it if they don't have the right to it. So obviously pointing the finger right at her, and everything came tumbling out, all of his frustrations with her, and everything just starts coming out. And the meeting goes very poorly for everybody, particularly for Cheryl. She's sitting there kind of shell-shocked in front of this wave of innuendo and blame that Ben is placing on her. And she's trying to explain her truth, trying to tell her story in this context where she's kind of being ambushed, and basically never able to get out her side of the story in this context. So all of this then leads to the great silence. When they stop communicating from that point forward, there's no communication, no interaction, no engagement from that point forward. And that's basically how it stood until one day they called in a court up and asked me to come in and see if we could help them out, because they were both taking the organization down the tube. So that was the context for helping them out and trying to deal with some of the mayhem that their interpersonal dynamic had caused for each other and for the organization and for outcomes. So that's a little example of the kinds of things that we see in workplace. I'm sure you all can resonate with some of that and some of the themes that emerge in that kind of a dynamic. You see, I have the kind of job that when people find out what I do, they they kind of have a reaction that looks a lot like that. I'd never want to do that. And what I do is I walk into rooms full of angry employees and colleagues and coworkers, people that don't like each other. And I help them figure out how to talk to each other and be more productive and to get along. So that's the job that I do that often elicits this reaction from people. So the question for you all, and the title of our talk today here, is about conflict courage. So the question for you all is, are you among the HR professionals that are a little squeamish around interpersonal conflict, who find that maybe across your job description, the part that's maybe not the funnest for you is dealing with people in conflict? So if that's the kind of reluctance that you have, if you don't like to wade into that messiness, then this is the presentation for you. We're going to be talking about how to build your confidence and be more hopeful and more skillful as you go into dealing with conflict situations. You're paying a big price if you kind of ignore conflict among people, both organizationally in terms of what you're able to produce and how many widgets you can put out, and the service and the quality and customers. I mean, there's all kinds of issues, right? But you're also paying a price in terms of your own personal development and your own career development and your own perception of others as a leader in your organization if you have some reluctance around conflict. So that's why I want to help you all leave this session an hour from now excited about the next conflict that you get to rush into and solve for people in your organization. Let's just start though with some of the ramifications. So let's say that in your organization, just maybe the conflict isn't handled all that well. What are some of the ramifications? I just kind of want to get you thinking in terms of conflict, its impact on organizational life. What are some of the things that you all find might happen if you're unable to resolve the conflict effectively? What are some of the implications or ramifications? Productivity is a casualty, indeed. Turnover, all right, yeah. Unfortunately, of people that you probably don't want to turn over, leaving, because 50% of departures we've seen in some studies are because the people can't get along with each other.
We have a couple a couple comments on Zoom. We have morale declines and
Oh.
employees will leave.
All right, good.
Silos grow.
Siloed growth.
Silos will grow.
Okay, right. More division among folks. All right, so that's kind of a good kind of getting our appetites going here about conflict and time, productivity, loss of good people. All those things are what we experience. And also, again, the theme here is helping you all be more confident and effective as leaders in conflict situations. So your credibility in terms of how you're perceived as a leader by allowing some of this stuff to happen and to cause that kind of mayhem in your organizations. So by any measure, conflict in organizations has a pretty big price. But I'd like to suggest to you all that it's an unnecessary price, that you don't have to have conflicts ending up in that kind of mayhem and the great conflagration or the great stony silence, that it actually is resolvable. And I know that because that's what I've done for 30 years of my career. And it's not just about me. It's not just about my mediation or the way that we do it. It's the fact that any honest mediator will tell you about 80% of the cases that we handle result in resolution. And it's not about mediation even. It's about effective, facilitated discussion and dialogue and negotiation. So what I'm suggesting to you all is that if we can take the worst cases that organizations produce and we can come back to you with an 80% success rate, then you all internally as HR professionals have a much higher likelihood of solving conflict within your organizations than you might recognize. So that's what I'm here to help you all think about and be successful. Some interesting information from one of our organizations that we worked with was Intel. And at Intel, they set up an internal mediation program designed along the lines of having facilitators go in and help people across different departments work out their conflicts. And then they did follow-up studies a couple months later. So they went back and checked in with people 3 months after the resolution was effective and asked them, did it stick? And they found that 83% of the cases 3 months later were still resolved. So people still felt good about the outcome. And then they asked them another kind of magic question, which was, would you recommend this process to other people? Do you think your colleagues should go through it if they have something similar that happens to them? And the statistic was 93%, which is pretty cool because it's higher even than the success rate. Because again, I said 80% solve, 83% were solved over 3 months later, but 93% said they liked the process and would recommend it. So folks, I'm sure you're really good at your jobs in HR. But to be honest, do you imagine that across the kinds of services you're providing, that you would get a 93% satisfaction rate among your, okay, I see you giggling a little bit along with me here. So, and I'm not just picking on your profession, in most professions, that's a pretty high number to get to. Again, all I'm saying here is that if you provide people with a satisfactory negotiation and dialogue process, and you help them do that, then their satisfaction rate is going to be much higher than if you don't ever allow them that opportunity. All right, so you psyched? Thumb rating? Thank you. All right, so you can show people to the door called resolution. To do that, though, you need to start doing a couple of things that I would recommend you consider and stop doing and thinking a couple other things that I would recommend you stop doing. So I'm going to help you and walk you through this and show you what the options are and how to get there. We're going to get there with 2 big steps. Okay, the first one is to help you understand a basic truth about what conflict does to people that are wrapped up inside the conflict. So something happens to people, to all of us, when we're involved and engaged in conflict. And I'm going to help you think about that and consider it in a more objective way than we typically do. After we take a look at that problem that's created, that first law of what conflict does to people, I'm going to help you out with 3 pathways to get out of that box. The second thing is how conflict affects the people that are in the conflict. So first, we're going to talk about the phenomenon of conflict. And then we're going to talk about what happens to people and their own thinking as they become more embroiled in the conflict. So I'm going to help you consider that, and then a couple of pathways to help people that are stuck in conflict get out of it. So when we're done, the hope is you all will be psyched about your next conflict and have a radical sense of confidence that you can go in and solve all the problems of the world. All right. So first, we're going to turn and look at how workplace conflict seems to be so intractable. How does it get so, wrapped around the axle and so challenging that we have an impossible time getting out of it? We're going to look first at that. All right, so let's start with this section by thinking about when you are trying to get your organization to be effective. You're trying to help people do things and get along and work through stuff. You're trying to help it be productive and harmonious. But then there's this kind of problem happening over here, right? And there's a little one over there and another hotspot over there. And you're realizing that, people just aren't working together. One of your biggest problems is people problems, right? Dealing with people that clash and conflict with each other. So I want you to think about these folks, and we're going to consider, first of all, what do they do? So how do we know that somebody's in conflict when they are in conflict with each other? What are some behaviors or things they're doing? Avoidance, yeah. So they're not talking to each other, kind of the great silence. There you go, talking to everybody else but the person involved. And, that's a classic one. And they're just kind of living in the echo chamber, hearing their point of view echoed back and people that agree with them. Exactly. Other things that we know that they're doing. Okay, right. Actively kind of sabotaging each other.
Noel on Zoom says water cooler complaining, which is similar to what Dana just said.
That's good. Is that copyrighted? I'd like to use that line again. So that's stuff. And we've seen things in our mediation work. People firing dirty looks at each other. People, holding up a clipboard in a staff meeting. That was always one of my favorites. Holding up a clipboard so they didn't have to look at the other person during the staff meeting. Slamming doors in each other's faces. There was a stapler that kind of flew across the room by accident. It was an accident, right? Flew across the room. There was a block that happened, or was that person moving too fast and the other was trying to help them, or did they kind of push them? It's hard to say, right? So anyway, these are the kinds of extreme examples, but mostly it's just kind of the silent grumbling that happens and where people, you don't really know that the conflict's happening, just that they're not getting along anymore. All right. So I wanted to get you there first to think about these conflicts and how we experience them, how we see them happening. Next, I'd like you to consider then how do we describe these people? Right? I want you to think in terms of adjectives. Right? So come up with a list of adjectives that describe how people are in conflict. And this is a contest and it's an assignment at your table. So together, I would like you all to work and come up with as many as you can. You will only have 93 seconds to do this. So at your tables for the next 93 seconds, jot down all the adjectives that come to mind that describe people in conflict. How do we describe these coworkers and employees? No problem. You got it. Everything else okay? Okay. All right. I know that was a long 93 seconds, but I was feeling generous. How many do you have on your list? Just raw numbers. How many do you have out there? What? Overachievers. 11. Anybody got more than 11? Do I hear more than 11? Do I hear 12, 12, 13, 23, more than 11? Anybody? 11 it is? All the way back there? Oh, right there was 11. All right, nice work. You all get the box of toys to play with. Yay. And everybody else gets to watch you play with them, and there you go, enjoy. All right. Yeah, and don't share them. Don't share them with anybody, all right? See, this is how I actually make a living. I go out and I cause conflict, and then we come in and solve the conflict. All right, folks. So let's hear them. You can't cherry pick just from the top. First item off your list. I'm going to start with this astute looking table over here. What's your first item off your list? Stubborn. What's the next one? Angry, stubborn. Aggressive. All right, next. Childish. Next. That one resonated, which is interesting because I want to talk about that in a moment. All right, what else you got? All right. Next, let's go one more round. Annoyed.
All right, from Zoom, we have not a team player, agitated, frustrated, angry, grumpy, troublesome, difficult, fixated, shut down, not themselves, angry, difficult, unproductive.
Okay. Oh boy. This isn't any fun at all, is it? All right, don't worry. We're going to find a way to get out all this conflict here. But this is where we're starting, because this is where people are, right? And this is how we perceive them, which is the important point here. They're blameworthy. They're kind of unskilled. They're challenged. They're difficult people, right? These are some of the things that I hear all day long when I get calls, often from HR directors telling me about conflict within the organization, the kind of descriptive terms that you all are using to talk about people. And I was particularly tickled to hear you say acting like children, because that's kind of a metaphor that I hear often as well, is that people within the organization are acting childlike, or this is just like middle school. You know, it's one of those, if I had $1 for every time I heard that one, that would be helpful. So when we think about then this idea of childlike behavior, let's use that analogy for a moment to consider, how do we deal with children when they're fighting with each other? We give them a break, a timeout, sure. And then as you say it, think about the analogy to workplaces and what management might do to kind of misbehaving employees. So timeout might be, paid time off, or it might be something else. How about, what else do we do? Do we separate them? Right? Okay, so maybe we find a way within the organization to creatively find another position for somebody so they don't have to work with each other, even if that's not the right thing for the organization. Maybe we tell them just get along with each other, right? You've probably seen that happen in organizations where you just say, snap out of it and just get along and get the job done, right? You try that one too. Or we warn them of consequences, So anyway, you're getting the idea. A lot of the things that we do to do with children that are not getting along with each other. And in organizational life, I would like to suggest to you that those things that we just talked about, those are all at times necessary. Okay, sometimes we do need to separate people. Sometimes we do need to admonish. Sometimes we do need to tell them just to get along with each other. But I'd like to suggest to you that that is not an effective way to actually solve the conflict. Okay, that to actually work it through and to resolve it is a completely different exercise than the way that we try to just kind of snap judgment, deal with children that are not getting along with each other or fighting over a frisbee or whatever. So those are necessary things, but really not effective. So to understand why all of these reactions and our critique of employees is flawed, we want to look first at the engine of conflict. So I want to help you understand how conflict works, and then we're going to take a look at its effect on people. All right. So with that in mind, it's asking me to do something. I'm going to push this button. All right. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look at. Okay, here we go. We're going to take a little tour of another conflict scenario, and I'm helping you here understand how conflict unfolds generally in any situation, and then we're going to apply this back to the workplace. So you can't get out of a conflict resolution 101 program without being introduced to the conflict spiral. The idea that conflicts do something, and you all have to fill in the blank here. What do conflicts do over time? Many conflicts tend to grow. Thank you. He gets a toy too. All right. So over time, conflicts tend to grow. And it's a phenomenon that's going to be very useful as we kind of examine what we're trying to help you all understand about being more confident with conflict. So let's take a look at this conflict. So I have for you a classic conflict spiral graph here, and I'm going to give you a little tale of woe here. We have across the bottom, you're going to see the manager in this situation describing it's going to describe their experience, and across the top, we're going to talk about the employee. So here's the little scenario for you that came to us in the mediation. The boss gave the employee an assignment, said, we're thinking about this new venture, this new product thing. We'd like you to work with a small team, lead them, and come back with some recommendations. You have 6 weeks to do it, right? So the employee goes off, does that assignment, comes back to the boss, and ta-da, shows what they have produced. And the boss says, that's great. Thank you very much for your 6 weeks, but we're not going to do it. All right. Now, when that happened, did the employee say, oh, boss, I understand. That makes sense. Of course, you're the boss. You see the big picture, and it's completely logical. You might do something other than what I recommended and work 6 weeks on. Did the employee say that? No, exactly not. Instead, the employee gets mad and says, what do you mean you're not going to do this? This was the best idea. I can't believe you're going to do this. This is ridiculous. You got to focus on what we're proposing, blah, blah, blah. So did the boss back down at that point and say, oh dear, well, I didn't realize you felt so strongly. Appreciate your hard work. We certainly want to think of a way to integrate your ideas into the bigger picture. Did the boss say that? No, of course not. This is a conflict resolution conversation here. So the boss got mad, snapped back at them. Are you accusing me of not listening to my employees? And then the employee storms out of the meeting. So actually left the meeting with the boss. And at that point, the boss started the shunning campaign. So I'm not going to meet with that person in private anymore. I'm not going to look at them when I'm walking down the hall. I'm not going to mention them, just the full campaign deal. Sadly, this is the saddest part of this whole thing. The employee ended up joining the anti-boss group. This employee was actually an advocate for the boss because the boss was the first female in that role and was very excited that finally a woman had been hired there. But now all of a sudden the employee's come back and is now anti-boss. So that's very sad. And that's what happened. The boss got to the point, I'm only going to meet with you with witnesses in the room. And then pretty much that was the end of it. And formal charges got filed. And there you go. So so I know this is all very depressing, but we're gonna help you look at this from a different perspective as we continue our journey. So as conflicts evolve, what I want you to recognize here is as conflicts evolve, they have a tendency to grow bigger and to sweep people along with it, right? There's kind of a quid pro quo that happens. One thing happens and then another, and they go back and forth, and therefore the conflict starts to grow. So this brings us to law number 1 of the 2 laws we're going to look at today. And the law is conflict creates carnage. All right. Now, basically, what I'm saying here is that in conflict, people don't treat each other well. And I know that's glaringly obvious, and nobody's having an epiphany right now or anything, because it's just an obvious statement, right? That conflict can cause carnage, and that therefore people don't treat each other well. But for us as good conflict resolvers, recognizing this fact of conflict actually is quite profound and has some nuance to it that will help us help people out of their conflicts. And I'll explain that as we go along here. So I want to give you one of 3 ways to use this information to get yourselves and your employees out of the conflict. And to do that, I need to be able to read somebody's name, and I'm not. Charity. Okay, great, thank you. Then I need another one. Patrick. Okay, Charity and Patrick. All right, good. That's the disadvantage of sitting so close enough where the speaker can read your name tag. All right, so imagine the following scenario, all right? Charity reaches under the table and she pulls out a lightsaber, right? And she turns it on. Yeah, no, we're all very impressed. It's a real lightsaber. And she starts going around the room, like just destroying things, right? And cutting chairs in half and swinging off the lampshade. And I mean, this is just a regular day for Charity. And we're all running for cover, and there's just mayhem and destruction, right? Now, the question for you all is, would we blame Charity for what she just did? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, you can say yes. It's okay. This is not a trick question. Yes, Charity should not have destroyed the training room with her lightsaber. All right. But I'd like to ask you another question now. Let's imagine that Charity puts down her lightsaber and she picks up Patrick by his ankles. All right. And then she starts swinging Patrick around the room. Right. And she's knocking over furniture and smashing the water container and the food everywhere. And Patrick's head is flying around, just smashing up the whole room. Right. All right, you can picture this, right? This is all right. Don't mess with her, Patrick. All right. So if that were to happen, the question I have for you now is, would we blame Patrick for the damage that was caused? No, we would not. This is also not a trick question. All right. We would not blame Patrick for what just happened in the room. Now, if you think about how we were describing employees in conflict and their behavior and what they're doing and what they're causing, in many ways, we are calling them at fault for what they're doing. But I'd like you to recall the first law here is that conflict causes carnage. And people in conflict don't treat each other well. They don't behave well. They don't do the right thing effectively, right? So all of these negative attributes that we have ascribed to people are actually the results of what conflict has caused them to do. I know this is a radical idea, right? And I'm going to ask you to kind of take a leap of faith with me here. I am not saying that this absolves people of responsibility. Okay, they still have to, be employees and do things and be decent people and all of that. And they're not at liberty then to just act like amok elephants and just destroy things everywhere. But there is this phenomena that in the grip of conflict, we end up doing and saying things that we don't normally do and say. I can't tell you how many times I've had people in mediations that have said, this has never happened to me before. It's never gotten this bad before. I can't believe I said so and so or did such and such. So what this means to us is that the first solution to this problem of carnage and conflict is for us as the conflict resolvers to not blame the participants. Okay, to allow them some grace here that maybe they're caught up in something that is bigger than them. They're being swung around by Charity, basically, by the ankles. All right. And so that's an important consideration when you think about fault and what they are doing. So I'm just saying here that you need to rethink perhaps this idea that we are blaming the participants in the conflict and judging them for being bad people. Instead, they're often acting in ways that are incongruent with how they perceive themselves and how they want to behave. So that's an important first thing. So what are the implications for us? Like, why is that helpful information? What does that help us do as leaders in organizations if we kind of accept this concept? What are your thoughts on that? Excellent, right. It gives you more neutrality then. You can see both sides in a way that you might not have seen it if you were blaming one side or the other. Other? Is what? Exactly. It gives them a way to save face, right? If they feel like they're not being blamed as bad people, it's just, hey, you're caught up in the conflict and the conflict made me do that. Perfect, nice. Other thoughts? Nice. Okay, great. It's almost like you're reading right off my notes here. I would expect that from a Jedi. After all, you have a lightsaber and everything. So here's some thoughts, and it echoes what you all have shared. It avoids ascribing blame. If we recognize that they were caught up in something, it helps us prevent us from taking sides. Exactly. You guys nailed all three of these. And then the last one was retains focus on fixing the conflict dynamics. And I think in many ways, the last one is the most insignificant and important of the three. Is you're freed then to focus on the real dynamic, which is the conflict behavior, the conflict that they're experiencing, and that spiral, and trying to break the spiral rather than trying to fix people that are broken or trying to punish people. So it's a very different mindset for looking at it. All right. So far I've asked you to think about how you are perceiving them as participants in the conflict. In the second solution, we're going to help you rethink and be helpful in helping them see each other differently as they're caught up in the midst of conflict. All right. So if your perception of them from the outside is that they're both kind of flawed in some way, although you're changing your mind on that, right, as you think about this material. But as you imagine them looking at each other, imagine that. How do they perceive each other? How does, yes, exactly. Like it's infinitely worse than how you think of them as you watch them fight each other. They're down there in the mosh pit with each other, and they're seeing the other person as really terrible person, right? Much worse than you thought that they were from the outside. So they think that they are, I'm thinking the other person in my conflict, and that person is vicious and vituperative and vitriolic, and I would even say vindicative. I mean, that's a lot of V's, right? That's a lot of V's. So they're ascribing every worst thing they can think of about the other person. So just as you're looking at them through this idea of conflict dynamics, we're going to help them normalize the conflict by thinking of the other in a different way. So we're going to do this in a couple of ways. The first thing is to realize that our job as good conflict resolvers is not only for us to see the conflict objectively, that they are caught up in something, but to help the participants in the conflict to realize that what's happening to them and what they've done to each other is just kind of how people act when they get into conflict. Now, this is a powerful moment in many mediation sessions when I've described to people this idea of, you know what, you have a lot of concerns, a lot of complaints, a lot of history, a lot of water under the bridge about how they have treated you in the course of this conflict over the last 3 years. I'd like you to entertain the possibility that a lot of what happened was because you were in conflict with each other. And it was almost kind of like a V8 moment for people when they realize, yeah, it's because the conflict was creating that. So in essence, you're starting to normalize for them, the participants, how they've experienced the conflict. And you do it with questions like these. You might ask them, what was your experience like working with the other person at first? And I have a surprise ending on the Cheryl and Ben case that I started with. I'll tell you that in a moment, but that was a very significant question for them. How does Cheryl interact with members of her own team? So we're starting to get some objectivity, right? We're helping the person who's in the conflict with the other start to think of the other person in different ways, not just from their own experience, but how they perceive them with others. How do you feel about your own statements and actions during the course of this situation and this dynamic? Yeah. So this is a powerful question because it helps them start to self-reflect and realize that, maybe I did some things that the other could have perceived of as negative as well. So the last one here is actually just draw the spiral for them. Do a quick explanation of what it means, and then say, do you notice yourselves in this at all? And giving them a chance to kind of objectively look at the conflict and what they did to each other during the course of the conflict. So the meta point in all of this is to help the participants in the conflict kind of think about what they've been through and to entertain the possibility that, maybe this is one of the ways that things turn out when humans get in conflict with each other. We start treating each other poorly, and thus they kind of normalize the conflict behavior that they are embroiled in, and then forgive each other a little bit. So that's very powerful, and that's kind of the second step out of conflict creating carnage. All right, so now we've transformed conflict into the dynamics at play rather than condemning the people that are caught up in it. We can add a third solution. In this one, I'm going to bring Ben and Cheryl back into the conversation. In fact, I have a picture of them for you. Yes. There they are, Ben and Cheryl. That's the actual, they consented to allow us to bring their pictures to the presentation today. So Ben and Cheryl, and you'll be amazed to know that this conflict was resolved between Ben and Cheryl, because they became completely different people. Yeah, it was like a miracle. They solved the conflict by becoming completely different people, before and after, before and after. There's photographic proof that they actually became different people. All right. Now, if you're a little confused, I don't blame you for being confused. But my point here is that people often say in the mediation, the other person is just so fatally flawed as a person that I can't work this out with them. And what I say as a mediator to them is, at some point, I invariably say this in a lot of cases, I'll say, you know what, Ben, you're probably right. In fact, I know you're right. We could sit in this mediation for 100 hours straight, and Cheryl's still going to be the same person that you've been working with for the last 5 years. Okay. However, I'd like to suggest to you, Ben, that you might still be able to negotiate and dialogue with her to come up with some new outcomes here that the two of you haven't been able to come up with before. And this is where we end up with the third way out of conflict here, is that negotiation over behavior and having a good dialogue is possible without changing the other person. You don't have to wave any magic wands here. You don't have to make the other person from one person to another, but you can negotiate new behaviors that will help meet the needs of both parties in the case. So again, this liberates you because you're not trying to help change either person. You're not trying to do that futile exercise, but you're helping the participants instead recognize that the way out of their conflict is by negotiating behavioral changes. And that you can do, that we all do all the time in terms of our interactions in community and home and work and everywhere else. So this is really the path to resolution, this fundamental shift to focus on the negotiation of behavioral changes and not trying to fix personalities. All right. So your conflict resolution courage will rise as you be able to focus more attention on this aspect and work with what's doable, which is creating a negotiation forum for people to come up with new behaviors. All right, so that is one of the great secrets of the conflict resolution field, of just allowing people to negotiate and dialogue to come up with new behaviors. All right, as we wrap up this section, just emphasize a couple points here. One is that I'm sharing the mediator's confidence, wading into very difficult conflict, sometimes the worst conflict that organizations produce, and helping you all understand what the effects of conflict are on people and on the dynamic of conflict and what it does to people as they get caught up in it. So with that, we are going to do a quick review. All right, the first law that we've been talking about is law number 1. Perfect. Conflict creates carnage. All right. And then there are 3 steps to get out of there. The first of the paths out of that is don't blame the participant. Are you looking at your notes? Okay, that's fine. This is an open book quiz for now, but we'll have a closed book quiz later, so pay attention. All right, do not blame the participants. All right, and then the next one, think parakeets. Normalize, right, the birds all line up. Normalize the conflict to help the people in the conflict recognize that what they're doing is normal conflict behavior, and that once they're past the conflict, then they won't be doing that kind of behavior with each other. It's like a revelation for people. And then the last thing we just talked about a moment ago was negotiating behavior. All right, great. You all get A+ for everybody, A+. Okay, so I want to give you all a chance to just chat with each other, reflect on what we've done. We're halfway through the journey here. Going to give you the other insights in a little bit, but I'd like to just give you all a couple minutes to talk among yourselves with your neighbors there at your tables and online in the 5-person breakout room. Yes, Nikki. All right. And your assignment out there is simply to do this, which is what do you think so far, some ramifications, and how might it apply to you? So have fun, have 5 minutes. We'll see you here in a little bit. Any questions what I'm asking you to do? There's a question. Sure. So the question is like, are we together jointly or are we doing them individually? Answer is it's a combination of both. So we're always doing some private work initially with the goal of, the goal is to bring them together if we can, because it's much more powerful having the people in the conflict talking with each other directly than having you do the Henry Kissinger back and forth thing. But so So a combination, but think in terms of bringing them together, because I want you all to be brave and confident conflict resolvers. Patrick. Sure. So we're getting into some of the good stuff here, so the question is, are you going to get more honest answers if you keep them separate? And yes, indeed, you will, with the goal of bringing that information into the joint session. So if I'm hearing something that I know is going to be an important piece of information that party two is going to want to hear, or that I think is going to be important, even if it's not good in terms of like happy stuff, if it's a frustration and somebody says to me, I just don't think I should say this, but this is how I really feel. Well, I'm here to help you do that. I'm here to help you have that conversation. And this may be one of your last best chances to have a difficult conversation with me there to help you do it. So I would encourage you to bring that up. But Patrick, how are you going to say that when we're together with the other person? Pretend I'm that person. What would you say? And so you work it out, you play it out. If it totally sounds like it's going to be a bomb, then you like say, well, how do you think they're going to react to that? Is there another way you could say it? You think they'll listen to it? Anyway, I could go down the rabbit hole with you here, but hopefully you get the general sense. Yeah. All right, there's your assignment. There's your table. Talk to each other. See you in 3 to 5 minutes.
1 minute. 1 minute.
All right, folks. So hopefully you got a chance to reflect and share some thoughts on how that material might play out in your work world. So gave you half the puzzle and put half the puzzle together for you. Now we're going to take a look at the second stage of our journey. Before I do that, though, I wanted to tell you about Ben and Cheryl, and they actually had a pretty good outcome because they were able to tap into the fact that they actually used to have a good relationship with each other. Cheryl was a bit older and actually served in kind of a mentoring position when Ben first came into the organization. So they had that kind of rapport and a mentor-mentee, and they were able to kind of revive that feeling a bit through the mediation process. And then they also decided that the problems they were having were caused somewhat by the systems that were in place. So they actually went arm in arm to the rest of the executive team and jointly presented like, hey, we worked out our stuff, but our stuff was a result of some of the problems that have been created by the systems here in terms of office equipment and material. So that was a breakthrough that they had. Anyway, I wanted to give you that so I didn't leave you hanging on that, so you'd know that there was a happy ending for that. So we've done a couple of things. We've looked at the phenomenon of conflict from the outside. Then we've looked at how people in the conflict view each other. There's a third step here, and that's how people are kind of the intrapsychic version. That is how they see themselves in conflict. So what's inside a person's head when they're experiencing conflict. So we're going to take a look at this and build the second law out of this concept. For this, I'm going to give you another little case example. This one was a organizational-wide fiasco. It was a new software rollout of a program that the company needed to work on and to do their work effectively. So there was software that was just rolled out across the entire organization, but it was a complete chaotic, disruptive, waste of time, bruised relationships kind of rollout. You know what I'm saying? Poor Enrique was a department head, and he had some concerns about it initially, although he recognized that the organization needed a new system. He just wanted to have some influence on it. So at first he said, I have some ideas that will help this be a more effective rollout for my team. And he fought for input on those ideas. And then he wasn't getting much traction there. So then he started fighting for changes to the rollout. And when that didn't work, he just started opposing the rollout, carte blanche, right? All across everything when he lost the earlier battles. He accused Monica, the lead person on this, the VP that was leading the project, accused her of being control hungry, that she was being stingy with information. I mean, he had lots of things to say about her behavior during this process. For her part, she was really befuddled because she couldn't imagine why he was ascribing all these really negative things to her, because in her heart, she knew she wasn't doing that stuff. It was just really things that she felt he was projecting or making up. how could he believe all these conspiratorial ideas is one of the things I remember her saying. And she also thought, well, he's just using this whole thing as an excuse to kind of circle the wagons, silo his department even more, and not engage with the rest of us because he's only out for his own good. So that's kind of how nasty that one got. And I'm going to use this one to describe the second law of conflict dynamics and how it gets so deeply challenging to resolve. All right, so let's first begin by focusing on Enrique here for a moment. What do you think was going on in his head? How did he perceive himself? What role was he playing, huh? Yeah, so he felt like victimized by what she was doing. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so he felt that he had things to contribute, that he was trying to do that constructively, and then he kind of got torn down a bit by that. Anything else on kind of what you think he's doing? Is he's an advocate? I want you to kind of think about that aspect of what he's saying, right? Because he wanted to be a change agent. He wanted to have influence. He wanted to make some changes as well. So on that, because there's this particular phenomenon, and it is this. Yes, that's Enrique. I have his picture too. The law here is that everybody is the hero of their own conflict. Okay, because I'd like you to entertain the very likely possibility, and I know it because I worked with him. That he felt like he was the great advocate, that he was going to make this rollout and this software changeover a really successful thing. So his ideas were the best and great ideas, and was going to contribute to the organization, and so that's what he wanted to do. But this is not just Enrique, it's everybody. When we're in conflict, we really become the heroes of our own conflict, right? We believe that we're right and the other side is wrong, and when it gets bad. And we believe that our contribution to the conflict is very small. The other side is the one that's causing all of the problems. So if we are the hero, then we believe what? We believe that we're right and noble, that we're just. What do we think about the other person? If we're the hero and the other person's the arch villain, what do we think about them? They're the bad person. We vilify them. We think that the other person is some, think of a terrible person in history. It's that person. So then my actions against that person are justified because they're that terrible person. Okay, so there's all kinds of implications that flow out of this idea of us being the heroes of our own conflict. And the effect on the dynamic of conflict is that it just kind of perpetuates it and makes it even deeper. And to use the technical term, worser. Yes, it makes conflict worser, reinforcing our beliefs and actions. And we really end up only talking to people that agree with us. I heard us talking about that earlier in our discussion today. All right, so that's the bad news. People are the heroes of their own conflict, and it makes them deeply enmeshed in the kind of truth that they're holding, and that's not good for the conflict dynamic. All right, so how do we get somebody who is so convinced of their rightness that perhaps they're not 100% right like they think they are? There's a very simple solution to this, the first step in this, and that is, what do you think the simple solution is? Stumped you. Be like this pug. That's all you got to do. Just be curious. So the first step to help somebody out of that trap that they've gotten themselves into, into thinking that they're completely right and the other person is all wrong, is just simply to be curious, to be a good listener. And yeah, I know that this may sound counterintuitive, and I'm not asking you to agree with what they're saying, but I am saying that the fundamental conflict resolver skill in helping somebody who's completely convinced is just to listen to what they're saying. Because if you try to do anything else, and I know we all have tried to talk somebody out of it, to tell them they're wrong, to tell them, oh yeah, but the other person sees it this way, they're just going to end up blaming you as you're part of the problem now too. You're part of the other side. You don't really care about my point of view here. All right. So the best tool you have to dismantle the hero's tale here is to just simply listen to their perspective. Now, I'm not saying that you do that only and exclusively, but I am saying that's the first step. And if you do that, then you'll start to win them over slowly. So the question for us is, why am I suggesting this as the main technique to deal with the hero? What are the advantages of listening? Okay, great. They feel heard. Say again. Gains trust. They feel heard. You're building rapport. All right. They're sharing more information because they trust you. You're gaining more information as you're listening. So all of those things are true. And this is not a 101 class on good active listening. You all are already at the 400 level. But I am going to tell you another nuance here that's not as obvious, and that is what you are listening for. And to keep this at the 400 level, I want to share with you this idea of what you're listening for are all the things that you already know to do, all the rapport building and trust building and all of that. But in addition to that, you're listening for golden nuggets. All right. By listening and listening well and allowing the other person to speak and talk about how they're so right and the other is so wrong, you start to hear little sparkles and see these little sparkles along the way, which are good things that they are saying. And just like panning for gold, you have to move like a mountain of material to get just a few flecks of gold, right? And so it's a similar thing in conflict dynamics. When you as a conflict resolver are listening to people complain, tell you how terrible the other person is, and you're having to listen to it all. But along the way, there are these little things that they're going to start sprinkling in. And these come in 3 different flavors of gold. One is individual. So let me give you some examples of what I've heard parties say in cases that I'm talking to. And these are the heroes. They've been flying around with their cape on, so trying to get the bad person to stop doing things. But still, in private, to me, they say things like, I'm not perfect, and there are things I could do differently. Right? Now, that came after a 3-paragraph, complaint about the other person, but then they're going to throw that in. So as a good conflict resolver, I'm going to jot that down in my notes because that's going to come in useful later. Or they're going to say, I know my style affects Monica. Okay, that's interesting. I'm going to write that one down too. I'm panning for gold here. I want open and honest discussions. Now, it could have been buried in a long complaint about how Monica doesn't allow us to have open and honest discussions, and she's always steamrolling things, blah, blah, blah. But as a good conflict resolver, I just heard him say that. I jot it down. And then later, when he is shutting down the conversation and he is unwilling to hear her perspective, I might say, that's interesting, Enrique, because I heard you say earlier that you do value open and honest conversation. And now you're saying that you really don't want to have this conversation anymore. I'm trying to reconcile those 2 things. Okay, so that's how you end up using the gold and peppering it back into the conversation. I prefer real consensus, not this phony stuff that we've been forced through this software rollout. Okay, so now later on in the resolution process, I can say to Enrique, I hear you saying that you prefer consensus. What does that look like? What would consensus look like right now in this moment? You and Monica in the room here talking to each other. What would a real consensus process look like right now between the 2 of you? What would you be doing or saying differently? Well, okay, blah, blah, blah. So you see, you're kind of using that gold that you've collected as a way to help them be their better selves. The other kind of gold is situational. So this might be things that just the situation implies the need for good resolution. So there are equally valid competing points of view here. I had one of the parties say that in this case. So later on, when they're stuck in at loggerheads, I can say, seems like there are valid points of view that you both have, and you both said that at times along the way. We're all under pressure to do this right. The software rollout cannot fail. So all these little things are gold that we can use later in the resolution process. We all believe in the mission. Sometimes that's all we got as mediators, but that can be pretty powerful too, particularly if the organization is a mission-driven organization. All right. And then the last one is other-centered gold. So they talk about things that are good about themselves that you can use. I'm putting quotes around that, but that you can use as a resolver. the good things they said about themselves. You can use things they said about the situation that will help leverage it towards resolution. And then you can also use things that they say about the other that are constructive. And folks, again, we get really, really nasty cases in intercourt. A lot of these cases are tough, but even in those cases, I can think of very few where they didn't say good things about the other person. They invariably still say good things about the other person. In this case, for example, Enrique said, the debacle isn't all Monica's fault. She has valid organizational goals that she's trying to aspire to. She can listen after she's made her case. She can listen. So he's saying all these nice little things about her. And my job as a mediator in this case then is to hear those, to extrapolate those, and to work with those. And then sprinkle them back in the conversation. So how do you get those things out? If they don't come out organically, you might use questions like these. So what does she do well? Just ask Enrique in the open session. Don't be afraid of doing this in the open session. The question before from Patrick about if you do this in open or in private. How do you feel about Enrique as a person beyond his work? That can be very powerful, because if they kind of start to think of this person as somebody beyond just their nemesis at the workplace, then that can be quite powerful. What factors other than Enrique are contributing to the problem here? Because she might be blaming him for everything, this whole fiasco of the rollout, when in fact it's multifactorial, right? What else, or what would you like to learn from this experience? That's a really powerful one. Getting people to be self-reflective and start to rethink their idea of themselves as the hero of the conflict. And then what's your preferred decision-making style when there isn't tension? So helping people think beyond the conflict and thinking about how their better selves would act if there wasn't this dynamic of conflict between them. Anyway, all of these, this is not material that you necessarily need to write down verbatim or remember, just the spirit of it. Kind of what we're trying to do is elicit positive things, not just let them wallow in the harsh kind of negativity of it all. All right. So what you do with all of this wealth, as I kind of suggested, is spend it. And if you've listened well as a good HR conflict resolver, you've listened well, and you've heard what they've said, and you've collected this little bag of gold, then you're now the richest person in the room when it comes to sitting down with them, because you can then start to spend it by putting it back into the conversation. Here's kind of a little visual metaphor to help you think about that. All right, so you just put it back in there into the conversation. An example from that case I jotted down at the time was, Monica, when we started, you mentioned that you could understand why, from his point of view, Enrique might have felt threatened by the direction that the software rollout was taking. But now you're saying he's just being obstinate. And I'm trying to understand what you said before compared to what you're saying now, and to reconcile those things. So I'm not putting myself into the mix here. And that's the magic touch for good resolution. Again, I worked with a lot of HR folks, and it's a challenge sometimes for you to remain objective and not put in your your fingerprints on the case or your fingerprints on the resolution. I'm allowed to be neutral and objective, and I know you have a different role than I do, but if you want to borrow something from my field, this is one of the big ones, is allowing them to come up with their own solution to their own problem. And in part, you do that by feeding back the good things that they've said to each other and about the situation. It's much more powerful if it comes from them and you only reminding them of what they said than if you're the one that's generating it. But wait a minute, you all have a lot in common here. That's not as effective as you said earlier, that you really do have a lot in common here. You see how much more potent that is. All right. So to conclude here, we want to help them be their best selves and find face-saving ways to resolve the conflict. So that brings us to the end and to the test that I promised you. Here we are. This is the closed book examination. Close your materials. You may not use your materials, and you must reconstruct the two laws. And on the first one, there are 3 solutions. So law number 1, 3 solutions. Law number 2, 2 solutions. You remember all that? Anyway, this is the test. We'll find out if you did. So at your tables for the next 2 minutes, reconstruct the 2 laws and the solutions.
1 minute. 1 minute.
Chris, you're muted.
Hello. Okay. Yeah. Number 2, normalize conflict. Oh, I haven't put that one up yet. Nikki's sabotaging us. All right. Number 2, normalize conflict. Did you get that? Everybody have 100% so far? That's it. All right. I knew you would. Last one is negotiate behavior. All right. So conflict creates carnage. Conflict has this tendency. So 3 ways out of it. One thing is to not blame people that are embroiled in it. They're being swung around by something that that is kind of greater than them in a way. We try to help them perceive each other differently by normalizing the conflict that they're engaged in. And then we help them tiptoe out of conflict by negotiating new behaviors rather than trying to change each other. Second law is people are heroes of their own conflict. So now we're looking inside their heads, and we're helping them get out of their heads a little bit by being curious and good listeners and using that listening to sprinkle gold back into their conversation. All right, folks, that brings us to 5:15. And speaking of tiptoeing, I've tiptoed a wee bit past our 5 o'clock. Just want to say a couple of things to close out here is that I hope you have new insights and some ideas on how to resolve conflict more effectively. I hope you have some new courage to wade in the conflict and to be effective with it. And hope that you can engage, normalize it, and be successful in the conflicts that you encounter. If you'd like to stay in touch with InAccord, we have a sign-up sheet there on the tables, and we will look forward to hearing from you. We have a newsletter that we put out that looks something like this here. So that comes out about quarterly. If you're interested in staying in touch with us, we can get that for you. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. This was great. This was wonderful. Appreciate
Nikki,
it.
back to you.
Hold on, Alan. Hold on. Alan, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say thank you, Chris. This was great. This was wonderful. We all appreciate it. Hopefully, we can reframe and get going.